The first thing you need to understand is that I didn't take this job because I was ambitious. I took it because I was desperate. There's nothing glorious about working for a government lab no one talks about, buried hundreds of feet beneath the desert like a secret grave. It's the kind of place where people disappear, into the walls, into the files, into silence. But I was broke, drowning in debt, and when the offer came, I didn't ask questions. I should have asked questions. My name is Elliot Rayner. I'm 34 years old, a former engineer turned glorified maintenance worker, and if you're reading this, it means the secret I let loose is now out in the world. I didn't mean to release it. I didn't even know what it was. But ignorance isn't innocence, and some mistakes can't be undone. Let me tell you how it started. I wasn't supposed to work for the lower wing. My clearance level barely got me through the front doors of the lab. Officially, I was assigned to general upkeep, checking the electrical systems, running diagnostics on the automated doors, fixing the occasional tech glitch. Unofficially, I was invisible. No one bothered with small talk, and the scientists looked at me like a piece of furniture that just happened to move. I didn't mind. I liked staying out of sight. It was safer that way. The lab itself was an architectural nightmare. On the surface, it looked like any other government facility. Gray buildings, armed guards, security gates that scanned everything short of your DNA. But below ground, it was a maze of corridors, all cold concrete and flickering fluorescent lights. The deeper you went, the more it felt like stepping into a different world. Above ground, the air was hot and dry, filled with the smell of sun-baked sand. Below, it was sterile and cold, like the place had never known warmth. Even the sounds were wrong. Footsteps didn't echo quite right, and the hum of machinery had this low, almost predatory undertone. It got under your skin if you stayed too long. The lower wing was worse. The first time I heard about it was during a lunch break. I was sitting alone, picking at a sandwich I didn't want, when two guards walked past my table. They were whispering, but the word Cell 23 caught my attention. "You see the containment protocols on that thing?" one of them said. "Triple-layer shielding, thermal locks, and the electromagnetic dampeners. It's overkill." The other guard snorted. "Overkill's what keeps it from killing us." I didn't ask questions. You didn't ask questions here. Not unless you wanted to lose your job or end up in a cell yourself. But the way they talked about Cell 23 stuck with me. I started noticing little things. A section of the lab's map marked as restricted. The way certain personnel avoided discussing the lower wing, the occasional scream echoing through the ventilation system. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. I didn't consider myself brave or stupid for that matter. I was just curious. I'd always been the type to take things apart to see how they worked, even if it got me in trouble. As a kid, I once dismantled our toaster just to figure out why it glowed. My mother wasn't thrilled, but she never stopped me. She said I had an engineer's brain. What she didn't tell me was that curiosity could be dangerous. At the lab, curiosity was lethal. The day it all started, I was in the middle of a routine maintenance check on the main server hub. The system had been glitching all week, causing minor outages across the facility. Nothing serious, but annoying enough that my supervisor, a man who spoke in clipped sentences and never made eye contact, sent me to fix it or don't come back. It wasn't a hard fix. A couple of misaligned cables, some corrupted code. It took me less than an hour to patch everything up. But as I was running a final diagnostic, my badge buzzed. "Access granted, lower wing." I froze. My badge didn't have clearance for the lower wing. Hell, most people in the lab didn't have clearance for the lower wing. For a second, I thought it was a glitch, a stray signal from the server update. But when I looked up, the security doors leading to the restricted area were open, waiting. I should have walked away. I should have reported the glitch to my supervisor and gone back to my station. But the itch was back, crawling under my skin, whispering Kuluk. "Just take a look. No one will know." The corridor beyond the doors was colder than the rest of the lab. It felt wrong, like the air itself was thicker. The walls were lined with reinforced steel, and the lights flickered at irregular intervals, casting long, jittery shadows. My footsteps echoed too loudly, like the sound was being stretched and warped. At the end of the corridor, I saw it. Cell 23. The cell wasn't like the others. Most of the containment units in the lab were built for biological specimens, mutated viruses, genetically engineered organisms, that sort of thing. But this was something else. The door was massive, a slab of titanium reinforced with layers of glassy material I didn't recognize. It was covered in warning labels. Level 5, biohazard. Do not approach without clearance. Electromagnetic containment active. Survival rate, 0%. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't stop myself. I stepped closer, peering through the small observation window. The room inside was dark, illuminated only by a faint red light overhead. For a moment, I thought it was empty. Then I saw it, a figure crouched in the corner. Its back to me. At first glance, it looked human. Slender frame, pale skin, black hair hanging down over its face. But something about it felt off. Its proportions were wrong, its limbs too long and its movements too smooth, like it wasn't bound by muscle or bone. It didn't move. And then it did. The figure straightened, its head tilting toward the observation window. Slowly, it turned. Its face wasn't a face. Where its eyes should have been, there were deep, empty sockets. Its mouth stretched too wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth that didn't belong in any living thing. And yet, it smiled. This slow, deliberate grin that sent a bolt of cold terror through my chest. I stumbled back, my hand hitting the wall behind me. The thing inside cell 23 raised one impossibly long finger, pressing it to its lips. Shh! The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, it was gone. But I could still feel it watching me. I don't remember leaving the lower wing. The next thing I knew, I was back at my station, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my tools. I told myself it was just my imagination, stress and a lack of sleep playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever was in cell 23, it wasn't human, and it wasn't going to stay contained forever. The alarms weren't supposed to sound like that. When an emergency protocol activates in the lab, the sirens emit a steady, rhythmic pulse designed to minimize panic. This was something else, sharp, erratic bursts that drilled into my skull like a warning cry from a wounded animal. It wasn't the kind of alarm you hear for a fire or a system failure. It was the sound of something loose. And I knew, deep down, it was my fault. It started with a simple maintenance task. After my encounter with Cell 23, I'd done everything I could to avoid the lower wing. I filed reports, tinkered with surface-level systems, and buried myself in routine work, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. But the lab didn't let you forget. My supervisor called me into his office that morning, his expression unreadable as he handed me a clipboard. "Lower wing," he said, not even looking up. I stared at him, my stomach twisting. There must be some mistake. I'm not cleared for. "It's not about clearance," he interrupted. "It's about manpower. Systems are acting up again, and we're stretched thin. Just run a diagnostic and make sure everything's operational. You don't need to know what you're fixing. Just do it." I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped when his eyes finally met mine. There was something in his gaze, something hollow, like he'd given up fighting a long time ago. He didn't care about my excuses. He just wanted the job done. The walk to the lower wing felt longer this time, the corridor stretching endlessly ahead of me. The air seemed colder than before, heavy with an unnatural stillness. My footsteps echoed unevenly, like something was following me, mimicking my movements a half-second too late. The control panel for the lower wing's power grid was tucked away in a small utility room just outside the containment area. It looked unremarkable, just a cluster of blinking lights and switches mounted on a gray metal wall. But as I stepped inside, I noticed something odd. The temperature was even lower here, my breath puffing out in faint clouds. Frost clung to the edges of the panel, creeping along the wires like veins. The lights flickered erratically, casting shadows that moved in ways they shouldn't. I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped closer, my hands trembling as I opened the panel's access port. The first problem was obvious. The system was overloaded. Power fluctuations were spiking across multiple sectors, most of them clustered around the containment cells. I ran a diagnostic, watching as lines of code scrolled across the screen, each one flashing red. Warning: electromagnetic containment unstable. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Containment systems didn't just fail. They were built with redundancies, layers of safeguards designed to prevent even the smallest breach. For the system to be unstable, something or someone had to be interfering with it. I reached for my comm unit, my fingers fumbling as I tried to call it in. But before I could connect, the power surged and the panel's screen went black. Then the alarm started. The corridor outside was chaos. Lights flashed in violent strobes, casting everything in alternating shadows of red and white. A voice crackled over the intercom, garbled and panicked. Containment breach detected. All personnel evacuate immediately. I repeat, containment breach. The message cut off abruptly, replaced by static. I bolted down the hallway, my heart hammering in my chest. The containment cells were just ahead, their massive doors lined up like grim sentinels. Most of them were still sealed, their warning lights glowing a steady green. But one stood open, its locks disengaged and its interior shrouded in darkness. Cell 23. I stopped short, my breath catching in my throat. The air around the open cell was wrong, thicker, heavier, as if it were alive. Frost coated the edges of the doorway, spreading outward in jagged, fractal patterns. And then I saw it. The figure from before, the one I'd glimpsed through the observation window, was standing just inside the cell. But it wasn't crouched in the corner this time. It was upright, its long limbs unnaturally straight, its head tilted slightly as if listening to something only it could hear. Its hollow black eyes locked onto me. And I felt an overwhelming wave of nausea, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into an infinite abyss. "Stop," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was talking to, myself or the thing in the cell. It didn't stop. The figure stepped forward, its movements smooth and deliberate, as if it were gliding rather than walking. With each step, the frost spread farther, creeping along the floor and walls, turning everything it touched brittle and cold. I stumbled back, my hands fumbling for the emergency override panel on the nearest wall. My training kicked in, my fingers flying across the controls as I tried to re-engage the containment locks. Error. Containment failure. System override disabled. The creature tilted its head again, a faint smile stretching across its too wide mouth. It raised one hand, its long, spindly fingers curling slightly, and then the screaming started. It came from everywhere at once, echoing through the corridors like a symphony of agony. I turned to see two guards running toward me, their weapons drawn, their faces pale with terror. "Get down," one of them shouted, leveling his rifle at the figure. The creature didn't react. It simply stood there watching as the guards opened fire. The bullets never reached it. Mid-flight, they stopped, hanging in the air like frozen raindrops. The creature raised its hand, and the bullets reversed direction, slamming into the guards with sickening precision. They dropped instantly, their bodies crumpling to the ground like discarded puppets. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear and the crushing weight of the thing's gaze. It stepped closer, the frost now spreading across the floor in a jagged path toward me. "Please," I whispered, though I didn't know what I was begging for. The creature's smile widened, and for the first time it spoke. Its voice was a low, guttural rasp, layered with an unsettling echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You let me out," it said. I felt my stomach drop, my mind racing as the weight of its words hit me. "You let me out," it repeated, taking another step closer. "Now, I will let you see." The shadows around me twisted, shifting into shapes I couldn't comprehend, distorted faces, clawed hands, bodies writhing in torment. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I saw myself among them, my own face frozen in a silent scream. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the vision stopped. The creature turned away, its attention shifting toward the far end of the corridor. It didn't run or hurry. It simply glided forward, the frost and shadows following in its wake. It was leaving, and it was my fault. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind reeling, my body trembling. The alarms were still blaring, but they felt distant now, drowned out by the sound of my own heartbeat. I wanted to believe it was over, that the creature would leave and never come back. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't leaving to escape. It was leaving to hunt. The silence after the alarm stopped was worse than the noise. It wasn't true silence, of course. The faint hum of the facility's ventilation system still lingered, and I could hear the distant crackle of a blown-out light panel sparking somewhere down the corridor. But the sound of the alarms had become a kind of comfort. a reminder that someone, somewhere, still had control. When they cut out, the absence was suffocating. I crouched next to the bodies of the two guards, my hands trembling as I tried to steady my breathing. The blood pooling around them was thick and dark, spreading slowly across the frost-covered floor. Their faces were twisted in unnatural angles, eyes wide with terror, as if their last moments had been spent staring into something they couldn't comprehend. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I had to remind myself that this was real. I wasn't alone for long. A crackling voice came through my comm unit, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. All personnel, report to your designated safe zones immediately. Do not engage with the entity. I repeat, do not engage. This is a containment-level emergency. Assistance is en route. Assistance, that was a joke. There was no protocol for this. The labs weren't designed to handle something like the thing from Cell 23. Containment-level emergencies were meant for chemical spills, fire hazards, or even a rogue experiment. This was something else entirely. Something they hadn't prepared us for because they never intended for us to survive it. The voice on the comm repeated its message, and I forced myself to stand, my legs still shaking. My designated safe zone was back near the upper levels, far from the lower wing. Far from it, I turned toward the corridor, my mind screaming at me to run. But before I could take a step, I heard it again, the sound that had haunted me since my first encounter with Cell 23. The clicking. It was faint at first, a rhythmic staccato echoing down the hallway. The sound reminded me of bone on bone, like a massive set of jaws snapping shut over and over again. I froze, my body instinctively pressing itself against the wall. The clicking grew louder, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the air. The lights above flickered erratically, casting shadows that danced and twisted in ways that defied logic. My eyes darted to the far end of the hallway, where the frost was spreading again, inching toward me like a living thing. And then I saw it. The creature was moving through the corridor, its long, spindly limbs carrying it with an unnatural grace. It moved like a predator, its head swiveling from side to side as if sniffing the air. Its black, hollow eyes locked onto the bodies of the guards, and it paused, crouching low to inspect them. For a moment, I thought it would stay there, distracted by its grisly handiwork. But then it turned its head, and I knew. It was looking for me. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed myself harder against the wall, praying that the shadows would hide me. The creature tilted its head, its smile widening as if it could sense my fear. I needed to move. Slowly, I shifted my weight, trying to inch away without making a sound. But the frost beneath my boots betrayed me, cracking softly as I took a step back. The creature's head snapped toward me, and in an instant it was on the move. I ran. The corridors of the lab blurred as I sprinted, the sound of the creature's clicking growing louder behind me. It was fast. Faster than anything that size should have been, and I could feel the cold radiating off it, nipping at my heels. Every door I passed was locked, the emergency protocols sealing off each sector to contain the breach. My comm unit crackled again, but I didn't stop to listen. I couldn't afford to slow down. I rounded a corner and nearly collided with another staff member, a young woman clutching a tablet to her chest. Her eyes widened when she saw me, her face pale with fear. "What's happening?" she gasped. "What's out there?" "No time to explain," I panted, grabbing her arm and pulling her along with me. "We have to keep moving." She resisted at first, her gaze darting back down the hallway. But when the clicking echoed again, she didn't argue. We ran together, weaving through the labyrinthine corridors of the lab. The lights continued to flicker, and the temperature dropped with every step. "There's a security room up ahead," the woman said between gasps for breath. "We can lock ourselves in there." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than nothing. I nodded, and we picked up the pace, the sound of the creature's pursuit never far behind. When we reached the security room, I slammed my palm against the access panel, praying that the system hadn't failed completely. To my relief, the door slid open, and we rushed inside. The room was small, filled with monitors displaying various parts of the facility. Most of the feeds were static, but a few still showed live footage of other sections of the lab. "What the hell is that thing?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. Instead, I focused on the monitors, scanning them for any sign of the creature. It didn't take long to find it. The feed from the lower wing showed the creature moving through the halls, its movements slow and deliberate. It wasn't hunting aimlessly, it was searching. And then it stopped. The creature turned toward one of the cameras, its hollow eyes staring directly into the lens. "Is it looking at us?" the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. Before I could respond, the screen went black. The clicking started again, louder this time. I turned to the door, my heart sinking as I saw the frost creeping along its edges. The air grew colder, each breath I took visible in the freezing room. "It's here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The woman backed away, clutching the tablet like it was a shield. "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. The door buckled under the force of something slamming against it, the metal groaning as cracks spread through the frost-covered surface. "We can't stay here," I said, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the emergency hatch on the far wall. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "It's a maintenance tunnel," I explained. "It's not on the main schematics. If we can get far enough, we might lose it." The hatch opened with a hiss, revealing a narrow, pitch-black tunnel. I climbed in first, motioning for her to follow. As we crawled through the darkness, the sound of the creature tearing through the security room echoed behind us. The clicking was relentless now, closer than ever. I could feel it gaining on us, the frost spreading into the tunnel, the cold biting into my skin. But we didn't stop. We couldn't. The tunnel eventually opened into another part of the facility, a storage area filled with shelves of unused equipment. We stumbled out, gasping for breath, our bodies aching from the crawl. For a moment, it was quiet, and then the clicking started again. The woman turned to me, her eyes filled with desperation. "It won't stop, will it?" I shook my head, unable to speak. The creature wasn't just hunting us. It was toying with us. As the frost began to spread across the storage room, I knew there was no escape. We were never meant to survive, and the creature was only just beginning its hunt. The frost reached the woman first. She screamed, clutching at her throat as her skin turned white, frostbite spreading like cracks in porcelain. The creature emerged from the shadows, its clicking now a deafening crescendo. It moved with terrifying purpose, its smile impossibly wide as it loomed over her. I couldn't save her. I didn't even try. I turned and ran, desperation driving me as I navigated the maze of the facility. My mind raced, searching for a way to stop it, to contain it, to survive just a little longer. And then I saw it, the control panel for the facility's failsafe. The failsafe was a last resort, a complete lockdown that would flood the lower wing with a combination of cryogenic gas and high-voltage electricity. It was supposed to destroy anything organic within seconds. But activating it meant sealing myself inside with the creature. The clicking grew louder behind me. I pressed my trembling hand against the panel, entering the override code I'd seen in passing during my training. The system whirred to life, and a robotic voice echoed through the lab. "Fail-safe activation in 30 seconds. Please evacuate immediately." The frost crept along the walls, the creature's shadow growing as it rounded the corner. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I realized it wasn't going to let me go. The creature lunged, its claws slashing through the air as I dove toward the panel. I slammed my hand down on the final button just as it reached me. The last thing I saw was its smile. From outside the lab, the ground shook as the failsafe activated. The lights flickered once, and then everything went dark. The cleanup team found nothing but frozen bodies and scorched metal when they arrived days later. Cell 23 was empty, its occupant gone. And somewhere, far from the ruins of the lab, the clicking began again. If you enjoyed this terrifying journey and want more spine-chilling stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new nightmare. And remember, the next time you hear that faint clicking, it might just be too late. Stay safe and stay tuned for more.